Warner Woodworth is Professor Emeritus in the Marriott School of Business at Brigham Young University. He is one of the leading advocates of microcredit. He is the founder of a humanitarian organization called Help International. And you can see right up here the title of his talk. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Warner.
Well, it's a privilege to be here. I am impressed there's this many survivors. The walking dead are still among us. So congratulations. I appreciate it. And I'm so grateful to be here to learn from a number of you during the day, not just the sessions, but the interactions out in the hallway, etc. And so I don't know how this is going to go, but I'm gonna unload crazy stuff for half an hour, according to my boss over here. And then we're gonna just debate, discuss, react, etc. Since last year, I've been starting every presentation acknowledging my friends in Ukraine who've suffered, who've died, the widows of some of them who are still, here I am in an underground bomb shelter after they took me to the new cemeteries of Lviv, Ukraine. The cemetery was overflowing the first year of the invasion. So they tore up all these farms around the old cemetery and started burying their dead just from that city in Lviv. And those little orphans, those little babies. So I got a PhD in Ann Arbor from the Institute for Social Research, which focuses on number crunching, etc. I began to do field research. I want to just give you kind of a sense of where I'm coming from so you can handle whatever crazy stuff I say. I began to do field research and qualitative research and then action research. And I was working as a consultant with big corporations and powerful unions, but I started working more and more with peasants in the third world. So I moved from corporations and education institutions and governments to nonprofits and churches, and then to the peasants, and became an advocate. So today I'm going to not talk about kind of Mormon culture and business and other formal systems of the church as an institution. We've heard about that today. I'm going to talk instead down below the bureaucracy, below the big budgets, at the level of the poor, the grassroots. And I'm going to try to share just a few stories that may educate, inform, perhaps inspire, and recruit you. I'm not here to recruit, but I'm always interested in finding people of kindred spirits who want to reduce human suffering. Among my Jewish academic friends, my Muslim friends, my Catholic friends, my LDS associates, etc. So I hope you see this as kind of a different academic experience. And I'm drawing from my a book of a couple years ago called Radiant Mormonism. Some of you have heard of Dick Bushman, Richard Bushman. I got support from several people, including Matt Bowman, who wrote a little blurb to advertise, and I now have to split my income from this New York bestseller. And I'm sure you've noticed how much money you've been getting from me, because it's a sacrifice. And Dick wrote this op-ed in 2017, in which he here's a quote: Mormons are funding micronutrients for starving populations in New Guinea, helping the children of lepers in India, teaching principles of successful living inner city, etc. And he said he became aware of my stuff and how Mormons would bring the law of consecration and stewardship into their practice as Latter-day Saints today. Beyond their missions 10 years ago or 50 years ago, beyond their Relief Society teaching, beyond whatever, they'll get out beyond themselves. And so he talked about this philanthropy stuff. And he argued that more and more members of our church, along with our friends, ought to embrace a more radiant Mormonism and a more radiant Catholicism and a more radiant Islam, etc. And so, so I just, in the spirit of starting, want to confess I've now become a pracademic rather than academic, and I am interested in what I can do. Now I teach at the University of Utah. I teach one simple little course, how to change the world. And it's an easy topic. And they've been wanting me for 20 years. I finally quit my day job at Provo and said, okay, I will teach once a year, one course a year, because I'm going to spend most of my life until I die fighting poverty in developing countries. But back when I was at the Y, just orientation, I got this idea to give loans to the poorest people in the community, to help them dig themselves out of poverty. We've heard a lot today about handouts and humanitarian gifting and stuff like that. Philanthropy that buys school books in the rural schools or whatever. But I was interested in, what if we just gave them money and helped the poor learn how to use that money as a resource and develop capital and learn what finance is and learn what loans are and stuff like that they most never have known, and help them move themselves out. And so I started this crazy course. Its concepts are now at about 630 college campuses across the country. And, so many of those deans or faculty came to Provo, learned what I was doing, said, we're not going to do that. But a lot of them then did get it going. Then I got a friend to give $3 million to start something we called the Center for Economic Self-Reliance in the business school. It's now known as the Ballard Center. We organized these conferences and did crazy stuff. So my life, just in background, this last slide about me. Well, everything's about me in these slides. But this was just 2 months last summer where I went, what I did, preaching, teaching, advocating, educating at conferences, at universities, lectures at universities, academic conferences, and working with NGOs. And it was pretty bonkers. My wife said I cannot leave the country again, but I'm just getting ready to go to 5 countries in Africa next month. So do not let her know. I will figure out the way to tell her I'm getting on a plane. She thinks I'm in Africa today, and here I am in Utopia. Claremont, Utopia. It's so precious to come back here after I taught this. I was the first visiting professor in social entrepreneurship at the Claremont Business, the Drucker School. So it was such a great experience working with those students and stuff. So I'm going to look at a few ideas, few concepts, business, philanthropy, charity, self-reliance, and maybe you'll make sense of it. And for those of you who may not be LDS, I know a lot of you are not, this is going to be a little bit of an educational thing as to where Latter-day Saint change agents and Mormon social entrepreneurs, where they get some of their inspiration. I draw a lot on Catholicism and Judaism. I also draw on my own faith. So here we've got this servant King Benjamin saying, when you're in the service of your fellow beings, you're only in the service of your God. And that we ought to reach out and figure out how to labor to serve one another. So I've been living this crazy dream for 4 decades, working with the least of these in the villages and the mud huts of about 90 countries. And we now have offices and NGOs, 41 NGOs in about 62 countries, actually. And I've applied that concept of Benjamin everywhere and had, in some cases, them translate it. And you can just kind of scan through some of this here. One of my joyful experiences in Peru was taking a bunch of my neighbors. Some were PhDs in high tech, and we took all these computers and set up computer centers in the late 80s and early 90s, wherever in the altiplanos of Peru, in the Andes Mountains, where they had access to electricity. In some cases, we set up solar panel systems. And among all those things, one of the things I loved the best was we built a little women's center for these indigenous women. They're 12,300 feet. I could hardly breathe up there. And they said, Professor, what should we call this center? I said, well, let's, I'm having translators translate for me. What's some great hero of your past? They argued, they couldn't figure it out. I finally said, well, there's one, I know one of your ancient ancestors. His name was Moroni. I said, and they all clapped. And so they named it, not knowing he was they knew he was a man, they knew he was a prophet. He was not a woman, like a radical feminist like I was hoping they would come up with. Anyhow, I'm going to skip through some of it. I've written too much text, and I just want to say that the challenge for me as a Christian, as well as in some cases a Muslim, in some cases Hindu and Buddhist and Navajo. I've been baptized into several, depending on your definition of baptism, several religious organizations because I try to be all-inclusive. One of the LDS apostles I've loved for a long time, Jeff Holland, spoke in conference. We have twice a year big conferences. And Jeff said this in 2020 as COVID was kicking in. He lamented the devastation, the coronavirus, as one of the worst periods of collective suffering globally in a century that in our day has grown to over 800 million ill and 7 million have died. I think it's about 8 million now. And he said, when we get over COVID, we've resolved that tragic disease, we're going to then conquer poverty. And yet today, I bemoan the fact that USAID has been disintegrated, been destroyed, but we will build it back when the time arrives, and we will have all hands on deck because we know of the suffering around the globe. So as part of this intro, also President Nelson, the prophet of our church, talks about serving the poor, serving especially the needy, especially the children, and argues that if we're called to become godly people, we've got to serve those who suffer. And he quotes from Alma that true saints have their hearts knit together in unity and love, one towards another throughout the globe. and we have lots of scriptures about the problems of wealth and concentration of wealth and rich and poor and so forth. So in Latter-day Saint theology about business and philanthropy and sharing wealth, there's the church's formal program, tithing, and other church programs that many Latter-day Saints in this congregation have contributed to. You know that well, probably. Then there are a bunch of other fascinating, creative approaches to do this work that are not, at least have not been commanded from God since the beginning of the church. We grew up as a pretty parochial institution. On the one hand, the church was expanding with converts, not parochial. We're baptizing Native Americans and also Europeans. We're flooding into the United States before there was a West. Utah was a Mexican territory then. And over time, the churches began to say we should be a humanitarian institution, not just focused on taking care of our own members, which I think I commented about earlier in one of the Q&A sessions, but to have a broad perspective. And so we have other organizations that we work with, whether it's Muslim Relief Society or ADRA, the Adventist, or Catholic Relief, or whatever else. And then we've had this prophet named Gordon B. Hinckley, who had this expanded view that we cannot just take care of our own poor, which had been the philosophy of our church leaders, our apostles, and previous prophets, who said, we can't take care of everybody. We need to get tithing and contributions from our members, and we need to pass it among our members to the very poorest in Latin America. There were none in Africa. But Elder Hinckley, President Hinckley, began to say, we can't just depend on the church institutions. We need to do, need to move beyond that and extend a helping hand as individuals. And so this third category has kind of grown in the last couple of decades, and that is one's personal philanthropy. That is one's personal or family business or family foundation or neighborhood community. I used to come here a lot and consult with California corporations in the Bay Area and also down Southern Cal. I'd fly into Ontario and go down here. I started meeting lots of Latter-day Saints between here and there that said, Werner, we're rich Californians. And I'm looking at this audience today. I'm seeing those same rich, aren't you all rich Californians? I just wanted to be sure I was something like that. And so many of them started little neighborhood groups with their Methodist friends, Lutheran associates, Catholic buddies at work, whatever. And they started these action groups. And I took some of them to Guatemala and some of them to Peru and some of them to Uganda, because they said, we want to give, and we have time, and we have money, and we see the need more and more because we got TVs now. We got internet and stuff like that, you know. So it's been amazing and so wonderful to see Latter-day Saints reaching out and doing their own grassroots stuff, capturing the possibility that we can start our own nonprofit with my friends, with my family, and we can do a lot with that. So I'm going to just roll through very briefly how we doing. We got 10 minutes, 9 minutes, something like that. I'm just going to throw out a few cases. You can glance at this if you want. But they sort of show the range of NGOs I work with. This one, Eagle Condor, started by some kids, Salt Lake kids, that went on missions to Bolivia and Peru. And at the end of their missions, they took on one set of clothes to go on the plane. They gave everything away, from their toothpaste to their shoes. And they promised those villagers, we will come back. We will go home. We will get degrees at the U of U, USU in Logan, whatever. And then when we start to have success, we will be back, because our missions are for our entire lives, not for those little 2.5 years things. And they did that. And these guys went back. And they bought a bunch of llamas and shipped them up the canyon above Salt Lake, started llama farms, and then they started this NGO, and it's been growing ever since. And here's the women's co-op there with Jaime Figueroa and so forth. Second case, Sustain Haiti, 2010, that island nation was destroyed. And it was such a tragedy. 230,000 dead. And about the only every government building in that country was destroyed. About the only buildings left were LDS chapels. We didn't have a temple back then, but the chapels stood. So I took a team of students down there. I talked to the mission president in Santo Domingo. No mission president would dare live in Haiti back then, or again now. And they said, we want to house all the neighbors around these chapels, Latter-day Saints, Católicas, whatever. And then we said, we want to dig up all the yards, all those beautiful gardens, all those beautiful lawns you have. We want to set up square foot gardening technology that will provide triple the amount of food of somebody doing a regular little garden on their little plot of 2 yards of land, square yards that they might rent or might be able to grow on anyway. And so we started this whole little project. We organized the first business startup competition in Haiti's history. And we got some recognitions. We worked there 15 years. It's now too scary, too dangerous. I wanted to go last year while I was speaking in Dominican Republic, but everybody in Haiti said, no, you can't come back, man. You're too white. So here's a quote from Mosiah saying, we need to impart both temporally and spiritually according to the needs and wants of others. So that's what we were doing there, rebuilding villages, rebuilding roads, getting water systems in, setting up orphanages for the thousands of new orphans in that country and so forth. A third one real quick, microbusiness mentors in Provo. As you know, those of you who went to BYU, you know it used to be a pretty lily white town. Now, 20% of the population is from Latin America or from the Middle East or from Africa. And so we started a little organization called MBM to see if we could help there, drawing on this prophecy or this call to action from Alma, that instead of our pride and our comfort zone and our greed in Provo, Utah, our fine twined linen, our yuppie clothes, the inequity and inequality and pride need to be overthrown. And let's figure out ways we can serve the poor and hungry and so forth. So we've been working there for 22 years, thanks to my MPA students who started this organization in one of our humble little classes. I felt so blessed. I can't do this now at the U, but when I was here before teaching at the Drucker School, and when I was visiting professor in Brazil and also at Michigan, we started little NGOs with my classes. And I figured out we can do that at BYU also. These other places, I can't preach Mormonism, but I can still mobilize returned missionaries who want to go back and help the people they served in Joburg in South Africa or whatever. And so this little organization, We recruited so many return missionaries. Well, Esabugu is different because there's no LDS presence, no return missionaries from Mali in West Africa. But it at the time we started there, it was the third poorest country on the planet. And I was able to work with Jaco Kazaki and Marion D. Hanks and others who quit when they got released from their church jobs. They joined our boards and became board chairs. And we raised a ton of money to work in those villages where there's still just mud huts. They've now got some electricity to some of those villages. But the big question always is, are we doing enough? Whether it's water systems or wells or this 105-year-old chief there, who I took finally, 2017 or 18, I took 10 MDs and a bunch of nurses and hospital workers to do medical expeditions. And they did cataracts on 4 people, cataracts on 140 people. And they replaced the corneas in some. And this wonderful man, who I'd been trying every 10 years to let surgeons I was taking do some cataract surgery on his eyes, he'd refused it. I found his nephew, and his nephew helped me convince him to do it. At age 105, he'd had 17 wives. He'd only seen the first 4 when he could see. Decades of not being able to perceive. And we took the gauze off on the final day of his there after a week after the surgery, and he could start seeing some of those latest wives. And he'd outlived all his children because the average man was dying there at age, 46 and a half. Male mortality, 46 and a half. He'd outlived everybody, all his kids, lots of his grandkids. And then he started seeing his great-grandkids and great-great-grandkids. Anyway, so since Brigham Young and Joseph Smith and Joseph F. Smith, who was a subsequent prophet after Brigham, they've argued that we ought to have an economics that has a certain degree of morality and focus on inequality. We ought to help the poor and put them in such a way they can begin to help themselves, and then they can reach out and help others. So that's the kind of work. Where's our friend from, what's your name? Serve with Help? Yeah, in El Salvador. You're one of, I think we've had 3,300. BYU, U of U, Yale, Harvard, Stanford students go with us. But this one started after Hurricane Mitch destroyed Honduras, and the next year we went to El Salvador and other places. But I realized in preparing for that next semester, we can do stuff. We're in a business school. We can tap into business acumen. We can tap into philanthropic values. We can tap into the accounting and finance programs at the Y and econ, and we can reach out and make a difference. So we started this little organization. The students named it Help Eliminate Poverty. Here's Lisa, who went on to get a PhD at UNC and is now on the faculty, and Natalie, and so forth. Joseph Smith said, "The man filled with the love of God is not content blessing his family alone, but ranges through the whole world, anxious to bless the whole human race." And I first read that in my teen years. I eventually proposed the church magazine publish an article about it, and it's inspired me ever since. So, well, we about out of time. You got 5 more? I'm just going to roll through these last couple. In '89, I started my first little venture with your friend Menlo Smith and some others in the Philippines, because I'd lived a year before in Hawaii with my family. Most of my students, I was trying to write a book. I had to leave Provo to finish a book, but they convinced me to teach a class. Most of the class were Filipinos. And when I left to come back to the mainland, the U.S. mainland, Provo, they said, "You got to go help the Philippines, Warner. We're going to pray for you every day till you go." 6 months went by. I forgot. I had things going in Provo. I had 10 kids. I had a wife who was giving me lots of housework to do and yard work to do. Bless her heart. But these guys kept contacting me, and I finally said, "Okay, I'm going to teach a class." So I started this little humble course, and it's been going ever since. We developed this philosophy. We're not going to give handouts like we saw charities doing in the Philippines. We're going to give a hand up. We organized with a few interns. We set up a U.S. system of resources, brains, business skills, entrepreneurship, talents, philanthropic values. And we set up a Philippines organization that would be the user system to take what we knew and translate it into Filipino reality. And so that little thing started, and since then, I have my dean's response here. I remember the dean saying, "You are so crazy. You will never," this was 89, right? None of you were alive in 1989. But he said, "You will never get any students for a class, and you certainly can't do anything to help the Philippines. It's a broken country." It had been the number 2 economy in Asia. Japan was number 1. But by that time, it had dropped to the second from the bottom. And so we started this crazy course. And we just had a powwow with some of those founders. We calculated we've generated $263 million to give folks there, and 1.2 million tiny micro enterprises. And I recently, the reason I put the dean in there without saying his name, is because I recently saw him, and he said, "I just saw on your website how much you've done there. Here's a check for $20,000. I said, "A dean with ethics? What is going on? I know you've got money." Anyway, and this one amazing woman here, Vilma de los Santos, she's now got 200 people working for her in 3 little factories, 3 big factories. And then they unite us, one with some of my rich friends from Bain Capital and Microsoft and so forth. We raised $800 million, I think, so far. And we've funded lots of private NGOs, lots of Catholic, lots of Muslim, a few Jewish NGOs, as we've figured out we can use our Latter-day Saint entrepreneurial skills to not only help our own church, and not only pay my tithing, and not only help build such and such a temple, we can also do it to work with others. So this is where we're at. This is my philosophy. And I'll just kind of wrap it up. Here's a list. If you want to get some of this, I'll send it to you if you email me. It's at warnerwoodworth@gmail.com. I'd be happy to respond to anybody. So with that, let's open it up. Thanks a lot. Thoughts? Questions? Oh, I think I have one. Oh, there's my homeboy Eunice, and here's some books. There's a contact. Here it is. There. Any reflections, criticisms, advice? Yeah.
How does it keep going? You mentioned that you have some infrastructures in there, but you take students down there and they help do a school or whatever.
We start like that.
Then how does it keep going?
We try it for 2 or 3 years, see what works. And they all want to know. We're just crazier. See, more crazy than we thought. board. Oh, sorry. Now I'm going to be recorded after all this. Where's the FBI one? They're coming, Warner. Trump team's coming. I resisted. I told my wife I would not speak that word today, and it slipped out of my mouth. I apologize to everyone here. So we get this little, we start small, we start humbly, we start with prayer, we start with business savvy, we start with, how can we find some friends? Do you have any friends left, Warner? I'd say, no, I don't, but then I go find new friends. So people would help get it going. And then if I pull out, I help get the board. And if you want to start your own, let me just give you the way to start your own board of directors. If you don't want to do all this yourself, 3 W's. I say for any board, you need 3 W's. You need wealth from some of the board. You need wisdom from some of the board. And you need wit. If you don't have humor on your board, it's not going to last. No amount of money in the world. So we start these little NGOs. And if you write me, or if you look in the back of a couple of my most recent books, there's a little how to start your own board, how to start your own NGO. Because I realize you can't do it yourself. You're doing this wonderful work, helping some kids in, is it Uganda? Haiti, yeah. But you need help. Other than giving money to one person to pay for some school uniforms, if you want to start building schools, helping 1,000, you need to do something like my friend Kathy Headley, who is from Michigan. Now she lives in Utah. And 30 years ago, she came to see me and said, I want to start helping women in Africa. Where should I go? I said, I don't know. Let's start with the alphabet. Z, Zambia, Zimbabwe. Which do you want? She started in Zambia. She's been working there. She never got beyond Zambia yet. 30 years. But she's been helping sexually abused little girls. 72% of the girls in Zambia are sexually abused by daddy or grandpa or the uncle or the neighbor next door. And it's called Mothers Without Borders. When she came to me with that title, I said, that's cool. That's going to be good. You're going to get sued. And Doctors Without Borders sued her 5 times in 5 years. But you know what? She won. So look it up online, Mothers Without Borders. So it's a great example of some fun, interesting. She was about 40 years old when she started this thing. It's been going all this time. So that's kind of my philosophy. Other comments, questions, reactions? Yeah. I do that sometimes, not often. I'm traveling, I'm gone most of the time. But what do we have? We have Education Week and we have women's, what's it called? Women's Conference, thank you. I've spoken at some of them a few times, yeah. But I'm usually trying to get beyond Provo. But thank you. Have you gone? There is an audience there. Have you been there? Okay. Remind me. Maybe I should put something together. We could co-author something. It's a happening thing. Yeah, it is. Yeah. I always wonder, well, never mind. I won't get into it. I mean, when Reed Benson used to show up at my Education Week and take notes on everything I was saying, and I was worried he was going to tell his father. But then he'd come up and give me a big hug after and say, I got all these good notes. And then he moved in my neighborhood. We became best friends. I used to visit him every week the last 3 years. He was unconscious, looking at the ceiling in his living room. Nobody was visiting. So I wanted to go to be sure if I need Ezra Taft or his help on the other side. I'd have some charity there. Other comments, burnouts? My favorite old student, yeah.
This probably be more of an academic question, but as you recall, I did an internship that focused on microfinance in Uganda back in 2003.
Speak real loud. For us, guys.
I haven't done a whole lot in the microfinance arena over the last number of years because I've been busy with my job. But I'm just curious. One of the pros and cons of microfinance. Pros is it gives access to capital to people who otherwise would not have access
Yeah.
to it, and
Yeah.
that it has the potential to help change lives. One of the and it's, at least I remember seeing back in the 2000s how formalized the microfinance industry had become. Um, some of the more formal microfinance institutions would have had a lot of, because of how big they'd become, have a lot of overhead. And
Yeah.
when you're talking about small loans, in order to recoup some of the costs that they incur in overhead, interest rates are probably higher than what you would see in a credit card here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just better than a loan shark by far, but higher than what you would see in a credit card in the United States. So I'm just kind of curious what your take is on, has much been done to try to address that issue and lower interest rates to help more people
Yeah.
get access to capital and not go into debt.
It's sort of like Wall Street banks versus little rural credit unions. And, so Muhammad Yunus, my homeboy, won the Nobel Peace Prize and started doing this stuff in Bangladesh, Grameen Bank. He and I both were very critical of that movement, but we knew sooner or later some of these NGOs were going to see there's money here and we can become rich, or we can become big at least. And in the name of doing good, like I want to say, I don't remember exactly where it was. One was Mexico, but a couple of those first cases, all their board members who started this little nonprofit, Pro Mujer or whatever, then they formalized themselves as a bank in the country. And immediately all 7 board members became millionaires. And we were offended, and we critiqued them, and we complained about them and confronted them at meetings and stuff. But it's a big playing field. And so, we can't control what somebody else does, but I'm into, and Eunice, we're into the nonprofit side, helping the poorest of the poor just get a tiny bit of improvement, not buying Teslas in my rural village in Uganda. So I don't know, but it's an ongoing debate. You can see the literature, and you can jump in, join in. All Wall Street Journal, everybody runs these articles on the confrontations, but I don't know where it'll all go. You had a comment? Can we get the mic?
So what are some of the government hurdles when you try to go into these countries? What are some of the hurdles or like challenges that you've run into where the government is questioning what you're doing, what permissions and all that you have to get?
You think we have a book about our society called The Ugly American for nothing? It's a problem. So what do? We start small. We start in some little villages way away from the capital. We work quietly. We build a track record of success, and little by little, we may grow to where we're ready to go into San Salvador, for example. When we started with Help International there, eventually their government had a big banquet and gave us an award. These days, their government would put me in prison there with my homeboy that's locked up. But so it varies. But we've worked very hard to not be crazy, not be ugly Americans, not say we got all the answers. We're just helping a few people that your government, like in India, my friend, speaking of philanthropy, who is it? There's a wonderful letter he's saying from on Peachtree in Atlanta who started an NGO to help lepers. Why? I mean, it's a great story. So her husband's a big shot lawyer in Atlanta, and they're raising their kids, and their oldest daughter is going to go to college. Well, where do you send your kid if you have a lot of money? You send him to some women's college, yuppie women's college in Boston. And she goes there, and 2 months later, their daughter commits suicide. The husband's the stake president. I keep wanting to say Kathy. That's Kathy Headley. Anyway, they're so shocked, and they go up to pick up her stuff. And when they're gathering her belongings in her dorm room, they see there's these little envelopes and little forms. They find out that Amber, their daughter, I can remember their daughter, was sending some of Daddy's food money to an orphanage in India. And it was such a shock. And they said, why is she doing that? She never said a word about it. It's almost like she's a Christian, you know. She's doing work in secret. And it is sad. Anyway, they go back with their stuff, and she's haunted by this experience. After the funeral, a few weeks later, she says to her friends, let's go to India and see that orphanage where Amber was donating. I can't sleep at night. I can only think about it. And when she told me about that, she was crying, and then I was crying, and now I'm getting tears. So they went. She and 3 wonderful women friends. One was Catholic, one was Jewish. I can't remember the other. And they get there, and they go to the orphanage, and they're so impressed, and they give the orphanage a $10,000 check. Not in rupees, I'm talking $10,000. On the way back to their hotel to get their luggage and go to the airport, they were there like 2 days. She said, we stopped at a traffic light, and our cab was surrounded by people, ugly, scary people, putting their part of their hand through the window. Or I could see the nose was gone. Or people coming up, struggling on crutches, begging for 2 cents, 10 cents, 20 cents. And she said to the driver, what is this? Who are these people? He's busy getting the windows all rolled up, right? Unclean, he said. They're unclean. She said, what do you mean? They're lepers. She said, I remember her telling me, Warner, I looked at my friend. I said, I thought Jesus heals the lepers. I said, you're so crazy. We started it, but it's still going on. And there's 1 million lepers, more than 1 million. I said, I don't know how many, but I know there's a lot of them. That's who they were. So what did she do? As a fun, kind of crazy LDS woman, she says to those same friends, let's start an NGO. Called Warner. I'd met her a couple of times. She starts an NGO. And they've been working there all this time. And it's just an example, I think, of the bottom-up innovation, answer to prayers, seeking to live the words of modern prophets, Book of Mormon prophets, Old Testament prophets, and even that God, Jesus, who said, you know, we have these things called the Beatitudes. And so I think there's lots of potential for all of us to reach out, take a stand, do some good, create a climate of experimentation. Don't assume you're going to get it all right. but you can start it, and you can not put a lot of money into it. Keep it simple, get it going, and then as it grows, you get some board members, and you get some expertise, and you learn a lot yourself, and you study to figure out how to be more effective, more impactful, waste less, you know, you start to have a lot of success. So that's kind of my take on it. Anyway, thanks. We burned out. Are we all ready for bed? Yeah, I believe.
You got one more
Or
question, Warner.
planes or whatever. Yeah.
So sometimes in the church, we want to build connections when we're building temples in other parts of the world, The church has always used their resources to help that country out to get permission to build temples, oftentimes. So when you go into a third world country and you want to do something, and you have, based on what I've seen, you have a lot of expertise.
Speak-
Sorry.
Yeah, put that right up to
All
you.
right, I'll put it up here. There you go.
Not that I'm getting hard of it.
So when you go into these third world countries,
Yeah.
there's a lot of government regulations, like even in Puerto Rico, there's just a lot of things going on. So do you use your expertise on people that know to offer a service to the government to create some kind of contracts? Hey, we'll help you here if you let us do X, Y, Z.
Yeah,
You don't?
the church can do that. Other organization with lots of money. We're peasants. And so we start, as I was saying, we start out in villages. Nobody knows we're there. It's informal. It's called, a lot of this work is called the informal economy. We got the formal economy, big business, universities, colleges, public schools, healthcare systems. That's the formal economy. We work in the informal economy that in most of these countries, there's very little data about it unless the UN is there or some outside researchers documenting it. So we work quietly in the shadows, and we report, we keep records of everything. We work with the village chiefs, and the village chiefs do their stuff because the government doesn't know what they're doing either. It's small, it's tiny. Remember that, some of you are old enough to remember that book by E.F. Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. Remember that? And then some students and I later wrote a new book about microfinance. We call it Small Really Is Beautiful. So we do that. And then as it grows and we move to other villages and a whole region or a whole province or a whole sector, or we start moving into the urban areas like in Brazil, then we will go. But we have a track record already, and we simply say, so far so good. We're here to help people. We're not here to give a cut to the government. We're not here to be part of your formal system, your state system, your welfare system, or USAID projects. We don't need any of that money. We'll bring our own money in. We're just going to be humble people trying to serve the poor. And so far, we have lucked out. The worst thing we've had happen is Modi, who's your good friend, Prime Minister of India. He got upset about us helping victims of leprosy and some other NGOs. So he finally made a rule just after we had built a community center to house volunteers, mostly older women, middle-aged women, young women who wanted to go work in our schools or do medical work, medical practices there as volunteers for a couple of weeks or whatever. So, and Modi said they can no longer stay on the premises of those villages. They have to, white people, meaning Americans, you got to stay in Chennai in our case. You have to take the group back in a van to the big city and stay at some cheap hotel there called Holiday Inn and come out every day to work in the villages, teach in the schools, cook the food, play with the kids. And I by that point, I was just playing soccer with the young men, football, but I had to go in. I couldn't stay, even though we'd started this organization, even though the founders wanted to stay. We all had to go in. So there's some brutality. There's some attempts to reuse it. Because, and his rationale was, India's becoming a rich country. We don't need foreign NGOs. We just all laughed so hard. What is that guy? What was he drinking that day when he made this ruling? It's just so insane. India is one of the poorest countries, man. Can't you see? But people are crazy, especially bureaucrats. Anyway, how we
Yeah.
doing?
I think we are good. Thank you, Warner.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you.
I am a little sweaty because I was just running up and down outside because our caterer got lost. But they're here now. And there is enough for actually all of you who'd like to stay. We can offer you dinner in the boardroom just down the hall. So thank you all for coming today.
Thank you,
it has
Matt,
been a
huh?
good day. And